today, and we've been doing this series over this last several weeks actually called Hey Siri. So one more time, let's all say it. Hey Siri. Hey Siri, and what we've been doing is we've been asking a few questions, and we've been talking about some of the deep questions of life, and all of us have them, you know, those times when we're just like, man, I don't know if I really want to ask my pastor or my parents, but I'm really thinking this, and so wouldn't it be great if I could just ask my phone, and maybe Siri would have the answers, and yet what we have discovered is that sometimes Siri doesn't know what she's talking about. Come on, how many have discovered that, right? And there are some questions that she can answer, but then some of the deep questions of life, like we got to look a little bit deeper, and so we've been looking into the scripture, and we've been talking about some pretty deep stuff in this series, actually some things that so many of us struggle with in life. I mean, we've talked about stuff like how do I get to heaven, and why do bad things happen here on earth, and why is it that sometimes I feel God's presence and sometimes I don't. I mean, we've talked about why did God answer somebody else's prayer, but he didn't answer my prayer, and I mean, we have gone pretty in depth in this stuff, and God has been ministering to our hearts about some of these questions. And today we're going to wrap it up with, I think, a huge question that people are thinking about, asking about in their lives in this particular season of time that we are living in. And the question is this today: Hey Siri, how can I be happy? Now, how many of you raise your hand today all over the room? How many of you say, I want to be happy? Come on, raise your hand. Oh, like that is everybody, 100%. I want to be happy. And yet the question is like, how can I find happiness? Especially in the culture that we're living in right now, because how many would agree with me that the last 14, 15, 16 months have been filled with a lot of unhappiness? Come on, right? And so many of us are looking at our lives and we're going, man, is it ever going to be the same? Are we ever going to get back to kind of what was normal? Am I ever going to be happy again? In fact, I came across this survey as I was preparing for this message that was done in 2020 by the University of Chicago, and this survey found out that people in the U.S. are now more unhappy today than they have been in nearly 50 years. The poll concluded that just 14%, listen to this, 14%, only 14% of American adults say that they are happy. And that is down 31% from just 2 years ago in 2018. Like, so many of us are asking this, like, when is life going to be normal again? And will it ever be normal again? And will I ever be happy truly again? And yet, even in the midst of all the stuff that we've been facing over this last 16, 17 months, I think if we're really honest, yes, all of this stuff that has happened has caused a lot of sadness and a lot of hurt and a lot of loss. And yet, if we really look honestly, some of us weren't happy in 2019 either. Some of us didn't have true happiness in our lives even before all of this stuff happened and the pandemic and all of that. In fact, some of you, if you're honest, you would look at your life right now and you'd go, man, it really doesn't even have anything to do with the pandemic. Like, I'm just not happy with my life. Like, things are not going the way that I wanted them to go. Maybe you look at yourself and go, man, I'm just not happy with my body, man. You know, I wish I could lose some weight. I'm just not skinny enough. I'm just not, you know, as muscular as Pastor Chad, you know, and I wish, like, why'd y'all laugh so hard? Y'all hurt my feelings. I'm just saying. And you're looking at your life, you go, man, you know, if I could meet that special someone, then that would be what would make me happy, you know, because I can't be happy unless I'm dating someone. And then I'm dating someone, and we've been dating a while, but I'd really be happy if they would ask me to marry them. And then we could get married, then I would be happy. And then I'm married, and it's like, man, I'm not really happy with the one that I'm married to. And maybe if I could be married to someone else, then I would be happy. Or maybe we look at our lives and we go, man, you know, if we could have kids, then that would be the thing that would make, that's the dream of my life, and I would be fully satisfied and happy if I could have kids. But then we have kids and we're like, man, if I could just get a babysitter because these kids are driving me nuts, that would be what would make me happy. And we look at our job and we go, if I could get the promotion, or if I could get the raise, or if I could get the new job. Or we look at our house and, man, if we could just build that deck on the back, or add the pool, or if we could just have the granite countertops, or whatever it is that we think, if I had that, that would be the thing that would be happy. And yet many of us look at our lives, and the truth is we have the very thing that we thought would make us happy. We have it right now, and yet we're still not happy. Why is that? I think it's because happiness is a moving target. And the truth is, we can have the things that we thought would make us happy, and for a while, maybe they do, but after a while, once again, we're not satisfied because the target moved. And it reminds me of this story that I want us to look at today. It's a parable that Jesus tells in the book of Matthew chapter 20. And it's about these guys who started out the day pretty happy and pretty satisfied with their job. But by the end of the day, they were pretty frustrated and unhappy about the job. In fact, let's look at it together. Matthew chapter 20 and verse number 1. It's kind of lengthy, but we're going to read the whole thing together. It says, "For the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out very early in the morning to hire workers for his vineyard. And he agreed to pay them a denarius, which is about $75 for the day, and sent them out into the vineyard. About 9 in the morning, he went out and saw others who were standing in the marketplace doing nothing. And he told them, you also go to work for me in my vineyard, and I will pay you whatever is right. So they went out again at noon and also at about 3 in the afternoon and did the same thing. About 5 in the afternoon, he went out and found still others who were standing around. And he asked them, why have you been standing here all day doing nothing? Because no one hired us, they answered. And he said to them, you also go to work in my vineyard. And when evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to the foreman, call all the workers and pay them their wages, beginning with the last ones hired and going on to the first. And the workers who were hired about 5 in the afternoon came and received a denarius, about $75. So when those who were first hired saw this, they expected to receive more. But each one of them also received a denarius. And when they received it, they began to grumble against the landowner. These who were hired last worked only 1 hour, they said, and you have made them equal to us who have borne the burden of work and heat in the very heat of the day. But he answered one of them, I am not being unfair to you, my friend. Didn't you agree to work for a denarius? Now take the pay and go, and I will give the one who was hired last the same as I gave you. Don't I have the right to do what I want with my own money? Or are you envious because I am generous? And so the last will be first, and the first will be last. Now I gotta tell you, I read that story, and let's just be real. That story frustrates the heck out of me. Come on, anybody else? Because when I read that story, I go, man, that ain't fair. That ain't right. Like, those people worked all day long and they got paid the same thing as the people who showed up in the last hour of the day. Like, I'm telling you, just to be real, those people in the story, I would have been just as unhappy as they were, right? And yet, as I read the story, I think Jesus is trying to teach us some things about happiness and unhappiness, and maybe even that there is actually an alternative to this constant search that we have for happiness. And so I want to talk about it for just a minute. Hey Siri, how can I be happy? And in order to learn how to be happy, I think from this story we can actually first learn some things about how to be unhappy. So I'm going to give you 3 things about how to be unhappy, and then I want to turn it around and try to maybe give you an alternative to the search for happiness. All right, you ready? Number 1, how to be unhappy. First thing is to expect. Everybody look at your neighbor, tell them expect. How can I be unhappy? I'll tell you how you can be unhappy. You can have some unrealistic expectations for your life, and he'll do it every time. In fact, how many know most of our dissatisfaction with life really comes down to the expectations that we have, right? I expected life to be one way, and then when it wasn't that way, then what happens? Disappointment, frustration. In fact, we've talked about it many times around here. We call it the expectation gap, and it basically goes like this. Like, if what I expected doesn't measure up to what I experienced, then what happens? There is a gap right there, right? And what fills up the gap between expectation and experience? What fills it up? Frustration, unhappiness, dissatisfaction. I expected life to go one way, then it didn't go the way that I expected. My experience was much less than my expectation. And what happens there is I'm frustrated, I'm mad, I'm angry, I'm dissatisfied. And this is exactly what happened for the guys in the story. Check it out in verse number 10. It says, and so when they came to those who had been hired first, what did they do? They expected to receive more. But each one of them also received a denarius. They go, hey, wait a minute. Like when I saw that you hired those guys at the last hour of the day, and then when I saw that you paid them a denarius, I thought, all right, awesome. Surely now I'm going to get 10 denarius because I've been working all day and they worked for an hour. They had this expectation, right? And when the expectation wasn't fulfilled, what did they say? Same thing that all of us say all the time. We've probably said it many times this year. You ready? That's not fair. Anybody ever said that before? Come on, right? Any parents, your kids ever said that before? Dad, that's not fair. I remember when I was a kid growing up, I used to say that to my dad. And every single time I said, Dad, that's not fair, or whatever. And every single time my dad would say the same thing. I hated it. He would say, son, life's not fair. Come on, anybody ever say that to your kids? Now I say it to my kids, right? And I hated it when he said that to me. But you know what? He was right. And guess what, guys? Life is not fair. And there are times when people don't treat you fairly. There are times when things happen that don't measure up to what your expectations are. There are times when you don't get what you think that you deserve. There will be people, guess what, guys? There will be bosses who will overlook you for the promotion and give the promotion to their son-in-law. And that's not fair. Guess what, teenagers? There will be coaches who will play their son instead of you, even though you're better than them, right? And that's not fair. There will be people who will let you down. There will be circumstances and situations in life that just don't turn out the way that you wanted them to turn out. And the quickest way to be unhappy and dissatisfied with your life is to set unrealistic expectations that life's going to be fair and that I'm always going to get what I deserve. And then when you don't get what you deserve, what's going to fill the gap? Frustration. And I'm unhappy. Why? Because I expected life to be fair. How do you be unhappy? Here's the first thing, is just expect. Number two, how can I be unhappy? Number two, write this one down. After my expectations aren't met, this is what I do. I start to complain. Everybody say complain. Make it a habit of complaining. In fact, look what happens in the passage, verse number 11. And when they received it, they began to what? They began to grumble and complain. Come on, anybody ever heard somebody like this before? Wham, wham, wham. Somebody called a wham-ambulance. You know what I'm saying? It's like, and here's what I got to tell you guys. Your words are powerful. In fact, words create worlds. And the world you live in is being created by the words that you are continually speaking. In fact, let me just tell you this. The words that you speak will begin to determine the emotions that you feel. And here's the thing, guys. If you want to be dissatisfied and unhappy with something, here's the quickest way to do it. Start complaining about it. If you want to be dissatisfied with your job, complain about it. I hate this job. I hate these hours. Can't stand these people I work with. Man, I wish I had a new boss. You know what I'm saying? Like, guess what? You talk like that for very long. Guess what? You are going to hate that job. You are going to be unhappy with it. You want your marriage? You want to be dissatisfied in your marriage? Just start complaining about your spouse. Man, he never puts the toilet seat down, you know? Well, man, she never looks before she sits down, you know? I mean, whatever. Come on, I've always wondered that. Anybody ever wondered that before? Hey, well, just look, you know, before you sit down. That wasn't in my notes. I just added that right there. You want to be unhappy with something? Start complaining about it, because your words will create your worlds, and the words that you speak will begin to determine the emotions that you feel. Scripture says it like this in Proverbs, that life and death are in the power of the tongue. What did these guys do that made them unhappy? They began to expect, and then when their expectations weren't met, they began to complain. But then notice the third thing, and this is a huge one. They began to compare. Check it out, verse number 12. Those who were hired last worked only 1 hour, they said. And you have made them equal to us who have borne the burden of the work in the heat of the day. Think about this. These guys signed up for the job to work all day for a denarius. And when they signed up for it, they were happy about it. Just glad to have a job, until they began to compare to the others who began to work later in the day. And suddenly, when they began to compare what happened, suddenly the people who were happy when they signed up for the job are now dissatisfied with the same job that they signed up for themselves. What happened? Comparison. You know, we do it all the time. We're happy with what we got until we compare it to what somebody else has. Man, I did. I remember when I was a kid, my first car, I've told you about my first car before, it was a 1981 Mustang. It was a Mustang LX hatchback, had the louvers on the back. It was kind of dropped a little bit low, and so it was like a little low kind of a rider, and it was a 4-speed, and it sounded like this, wee, wee, and my friends called it the kazoo, really. One of my friends bought me a little kazoo, and I hung it on my mirror, and guess what? Like, it wasn't the greatest car. I graduated in 93, so it was a 12-year-old, or 94, so it was a 13-year-old car, and so it wasn't the greatest car, but guess what? It was my car, and it got me where I needed to go, and I liked that car just fine until my sister got her first car. And her first car was a 1992 Pontiac Grand Am. Come on, right? And it wasn't even that great of a car either, but it was 11 years newer than my car, right? And so I was happy with my car till she got her car, and then all of a sudden, my car stinks, man. What is wrong with this car, right? And how many know we do that, don't we? We're happy with, you're happy with your house until you watch all day, marathon of HGTV, and suddenly my house looks nothing like Chip and Joe designed, you know what I'm saying? And it's a terrible house. I hate it. My car's great till the neighbor gets a new car, and then something's wrong with my 3-year-old car. I can't believe I'm still driving this old hunk of junk, you know? And guess what, guys? Pastors are the worst. Let's be real. Like, I'll have a church service on one Sunday. Man, it was a pretty good Sunday. A couple people got saved. Worship was good. Met some new people. Felt like I preached pretty good. Man, it's a pretty good day. Go home, flip open my phone, start scrolling through my Instagram, and all my pastor friends are saying, man, we had the best day ever. Record attendance, 1,000 people got saved, and we baptized 2,700. You know what I'm saying? I'm like, man, my church stinks. It's real. And here's the thing, though, that we have to understand. Social media, it ain't real. Because nobody ever goes on social media and goes, man, church stunk today. Like it rained and nobody showed up and nobody got saved and I messed up my sermon. And no, we don't post that. We only post the highlights. And my life's good until I look at the highlights of somebody else's vacation or what somebody else is eating or what somebody else's, airbrushed family looks like. And we begin to compare, right? And guess what? Comparison is the thief of joy. You want to be dissatisfied? You want to be unhappy? Start to expect. Start to complain. Start to compare. So you go, well, gosh, there's got to be an alternative. Okay, Siri, how can I be happy? Well, there is an alternative, I think. And I think the alternative is really not to continue looking and searching for happiness. I think the alternative is actually to begin learning about contentment. Everybody say contentment. Learning to be content. In fact, this is what Paul was talking about in this passage in the book of Philippians. Philippians chapter 4 and verse 11. Look what he says. He says, I have what? I have learned the secret of what? Of being content in every situation. Now, first, what you have to understand is he said, this didn't come natural. I had to learn it. It was something that I am learning, that I have learned the secret of being content. And what does he say? He says, I am content in what? In every circumstance, in every situation. Now, if you know much about the book of Philippians, then you probably know that when Paul wrote that, he was writing it actually from a prison cell. And what was he saying? He was saying, even in this prison cell, I have learned that even though the circumstances are not good, that I can still be content even in the midst of bad circumstances. And here's the deal, is that so many of us base our happiness on the happenings around us, on our circumstances. You know what a circumstance is? It comes from two words, the circle that you are standing in. And so as long as the circle that I am standing in is good, then I can be happy. happy, but if I'm standing outside of a good circle, then I am not happy. But Paul is going, I'm standing in the middle of a prison cell, and I have learned that I may not be happy, but I can be content in every circumstance that I face in life. In fact, that's kind of our bottom line for today, and that is this: you don't have to be happy in order to be content, but if you are content, you will experience much more happiness. Man, that's so good. Y'all tweet that out. Come on, right? Good preaching. It's true. You don't have to be happy to be content, but if you will learn to be content, you will experience a whole lot more happiness. So you say, well, Pastor, how do I do this? Well, I think there are a couple of things that we can see from this story that Jesus told about learning how to be content in every circumstance. In fact, if you're taking notes, write them down. Number one is this: if I want to be content, here's what I have to do. I have to learn to rejoice in God's goodness in others. Instead of comparing to what somebody else has to what I have, instead, what I got to learn to do is that when God blesses somebody else, man, I'm going to rejoice. I'm going to be happy for them. In fact, this is what he says in verse 15. He says, don't I have the right, the master says, don't I have the right to do what I want with my own money? Or are you envious because I am generous? In other words, he's going, I can give them whatever I want to give them. It's my money. I'm the master. And guess what? In the story, who is the master representing? It's representing God. And guess what? God can bless whoever he wants to bless. He can do whatever he wants in somebody else's life. And I think most of us, we are happy when God blesses somebody else as long as he doesn't bless them more than he's blessing us. But as soon as God's blessing someone else more than he is us, then we start to be discontent. Come on, I'm just preaching where I'm at. I don't know if some of y'all are here too. But you know what the Bible says that we should do? It says we should rejoice with those who rejoice and mourn with those who mourn. You know what I have found? It's easier to mourn with those who mourn than it is sometimes to rejoice with those who rejoice. Why? Because it's easy to go, man, I'm so sorry that's going on with you, while in the back of our mind we're going, I'm just glad it's not going on with me. But when someone is being blessed more than us, it's so much harder to go, man, I'm so glad that's happening for you, even though I'm frustrated that it's not happening for me. I have a friend he's a businessman, and he'll call me sometimes and he'll just tell me all the great stuff that's happening in his business and in his life. And I just try to say, man, that's so awesome, man. I'm so proud of you. That is so cool. I love that. And one time he told me, he said, you know, Pastor, the reason that I call you is because I don't have anybody else that will celebrate it with me. Anybody else that I talk to, they'll be jealous, or they'll be frustrated, they'll be mad, they'll think that I'm bragging. And so sometimes I just need somebody to rejoice with me. And isn't that sad? And yet, if we're going to be content, here's what we have to learn to do, is that even if God blesses someone else more than me, I'm going to rejoice in the fact that God is blessing them. And I'm going to understand that just because God blesses someone else doesn't mean he has any less to be able to bless me with as well. Come on, God never runs out of blessings. So even if he blesses someone else, there's still enough for eventually him to bless me in his timing, right? How do I learn to be content? Is I have to rejoice in God's goodness in others. But then, number two, here's what I have to do. I have to recognize God's goodness in me. Check it out, verse 13. But he answered one of them, I'm not being unfair to you, friends. Didn't you agree to work for a denarius? Now take your pay and go. In other words, he goes, this is what you agreed to. I'm not being unfair to you. In fact, the reason that you can't see my blessing in your life is because you're so focused on what I did for the guys who've only been here an hour. But if you'd take your eyes off of them, you'd see, hey, I've brought blessings for you as well. I haven't been unfair to you. Guess what, guys? When we really look at our life, when we take our eyes off of what's happening for someone else, and we really look at our life, we got to go, wow, God has blessed us too. Man, look at all the things that he has done in our lives. And, here's the thing is that sometimes we look at that grass that's greener, on the other side of the fence, but we just don't realize that the reason it's greener over there is because there's a whole bunch of poop in the yard. You know what I'm saying? And sometimes we go, man, I wish that I had what they had, but we don't know the poop that they had to shovel in order to get the green grass that they're facing. And maybe we should just go, wow, you know what? I'm going to rejoice at others being blessed. But I'm going to recognize, man, I've been blessed too. And guess what? This isn't, if I'm not being blessed right now, it's just maybe it's not the end. There's coming a time when I'm going to be blessed as well. rejoice in the blessings of others, recognize God's goodness in me. But then the third thing to being content is simply this, is that we have to remember that we're not that good. You know what we want? We expect fairness. Guess what, guys? You don't want fairness. Fairness is overrated. We don't want God to be fair. Because you know if he is fair? If we really got what we deserve, you know, it'd be death. Bible says that we have all sinned and fall short of the glory of God. And that the payment, the penalty, what we deserve is death. The wages of sin is death. We don't want what we deserve. But aren't you thankful that God doesn't give us what we deserve? Like he gives us more than we deserve. His goodness is far beyond our goodness. And so we remember, wow, man, I don't deserve anything. I deserve to die, but God in his mercy, he has loved me. And so maybe I can learn to be content in what he is doing and what he has done in my life. In fact, I think this is what Paul was talking about in this passage in Philippians chapter 4. Look what he says. He says, I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in every situation, whether well-fed or hungry or living in plenty or in want. Verse 13, for I can do what? I can do all things through him who gives me strength. How many have heard that verse before? I can do all things through him who gives me strength, right? Most of the time when you hear that verse, it's some athlete, you know, running a marathon. I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. And that's okay, it's good, I like that, but that's not the context of the verse. You know what the context of the verse really is? The context of the verse is this idea of contentment. Paul goes, if I have a little, if I have a lot, if I'm in jail, if I'm living in a nice home, wherever I'm at, I can be content. And this is how I can be content, because I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. He goes, this is the secret of contentment. You ready for this? Christ is enough. And guys, that's hard. It's hard to learn. That's why he said I have to learn the secret of contentment. It's hard. I think we're learning it in this season. Let's just be real. It's been a tough season. This last 16, 17 months, it's been a season of loss. It's been a season of uncertainty. It's been a season of a lot of discontentment, anger, sadness. Some of you have lost jobs. Some of you have gone through things. You've lost family members. Like, this has been a difficult season. I'll just tell you, honest, like, it's been a difficult season for me. I've shared it with you, and so I'm not trying to make anybody feel sorry for me. I'm just saying it's been hard. Being really real, the last couple of weeks have been really, really hard. And I think this is the lesson that I'm trying to learn. In every circumstance, I can be content. Why? Because Christ is enough. Even if things never get back to normal. Even if circumstances are not good, I can trust that he is, and that he is working for my good. And that even when I don't maybe have what I want right now, I have all that I need because he is enough. Here's what I want you to do all over this room. I want you to bow your heads and close your eyes. Maybe some of you are there right now. Maybe the truth is right now is you haven't experienced this kind of contentment because you don't have this kind of relationship with Jesus. You don't know what it's like to know that Christ is enough because you don't have a relationship with him today. But here in this moment, right here, right now, he's saying, I love you. I want to know you. I want to have relationship with you, and all you got to do is call out to me. No amount of stuff is going to be enough. No amount of all the things that we put out there that if I could have this or that or whatever, then no, none of that stuff's ever going to truly satisfy you. Only one thing. Only one thing. And that's relationship with the Creator. He made you with this God-sized hole that can only be fulfilled in him. But man, there's a joy and there's a peace and there's a contentment that can come from knowing, I know him. And he is enough. Maybe you're here in this room today and you say, I know I'm not where I should be in my relationship with God. Maybe you're online and you're saying that, I know I'm not where I should be in my relationship with God, but today I want to come to a right place, a relationship with him. I want to ask him to forgive me and be my Savior.
Thank you for joining us online today. Make sure and hit subscribe to this channel and hit the bell for more notifications. We can't wait to engage with you this week.